She had $9 in her bank account. Her mother was dying. And the most dangerous man in the city just threw a coffee cup at her face. Every person in that diner stopped breathing. 30 years. Not one soul had ever talked back to Dominic Vescari. Not his enemies. Not his lawyers. Not the men who carried guns for him. But this woman, exhausted, broke, still dripping hot coffee down the front of her uniform, looked him dead in the eyes and said the 5 words that would bring down an entire criminal empire. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't have a plan. She had nothing left to lose. And that made her the most dangerous person in the room. This is the story of how one fearless waitress walked into the worst moment of her life and accidentally changed everything. If you're new here, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it, because from the very first minute, nothing about this goes the way you'd expect. The coffee burned through her uniform before she even felt it. Naomi Hale stood in the middle of the Anchor diner with hot liquid soaking through the front of her yellow polyester shirt, and for a full 3 seconds, she didn't move. Not because she was in shock. Not because the pain hadn't registered. She didn't move because she was doing the math, the silent, exhausted arithmetic that had become the rhythm of her life. If she reacted wrong, she lost this job. If she lost this job, she lost the apartment. If she lost the apartment, her mother died in a hospital hallway instead of somewhere with a real bed. So she stood very still, and she did the math, and she breathed. The man who had thrown the cup was already on his feet, 240 pounds of tailored Italian wool and 40 years of untouched rage, pointing one thick finger in the direction of the counter like the entire diner owed him a personal apology. His name was Dominic Vescari, though most people in this city never said that name above a whisper, and never said it twice. He had come in at 7:14 in the morning, which was unusual. Men like Dominic Vescari did not typically eat breakfast in places with vinyl booth seats and sticky menus. And he had ordered black coffee with the tone of a man who expected the world to rearrange itself around his preferences. The coffee had been 2 degrees below what he considered acceptable. That was the whole story. That was the entire reason Naomi Hale was standing in a soaked uniform at 7:22 in the morning, with her hands very carefully at her sides. Every other person in the Anchor diner had gone absolutely still. A trucker near the window had put down his fork. The 2 nurses at the counter, both mid-sentence, had stopped talking. Even Lou, the short-order cook who'd once told Naomi he feared nothing on this earth, had gone invisible somewhere behind the pass-through window. Lou had grown up in this city. He recognized the men standing near the door. 4 of them, wide-shouldered, their hands loose and patient at their sides. And he knew exactly what that recognition meant. Dominic Vescari was still talking. His voice was the low, controlled kind of loud that doesn't need volume to fill a room. He was saying something about incompetence, something about standards, something about how this city had gone to garbage because nobody took pride in anything anymore. The words ran together. Naomi wasn't listening to the words. She was watching his hands. Then he stopped, because she looked at him. Not the terrified, ground-level glance that most people offered Dominic Vescari. Not the chin-down, eyes-averted apology in advance that he had been receiving from human beings for 4 decades. Naomi Hale, 34 years old, 131 pounds, with coffee burning through her shirt and $9.40 in her checking account, and a mother whose lungs were slowly drowning in fluid 2 miles east of here, looked at Dominic Vescari the way you look at something that has inconvenienced you. The diner didn't just go quiet. It went geological, the kind of silence that has weight and pressure and temperature. "If you do that again," Naomi said, "I'll stop you myself." Her voice was flat. Not brave. She would think about this later and understand that bravery implies a choice. And she hadn't really made a choice. She was simply too tired for the alternative. She was 34 years old and she had been apologizing to people her entire life. And somewhere in the last 6 months, between the second rejection letter from the insurance company and the night she sat on the bathroom floor and just breathed because there was nothing else to do, she had quietly run out of apologies. The room did not breathe. One of the men near the door, the one with a jaw like a cinder block, who Naomi would later learn was named Carver, took a single step forward. Just one. It was the kind of step that wasn't really a step. It was a question. It was the whole mechanism of fear translated into one shift of body weight. and it had worked on every human being who had ever stood in a room with Dominic Viscari for the past 4 decades. Naomi did not take a step back. Dominic raised one hand. Carver stopped. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. Naomi became aware of the sound of the coffee still dripping from the edge of the counter onto the linoleum. She became aware of her own heartbeat, which was not as steady as she would have preferred. She became aware that her right knee was trembling slightly, not from fear, or not only from fear, but from the 3 double shifts she had worked this week, and the fact that she had eaten half a granola bar for dinner last night because the other half was in her mother's hospital bag. Dominic Viscari looked at her for a long time. Then, very slowly, he sat back down. "Bring me another cup," he said, "and make it hot this time." Naomi turned around, walked back to the counter, and poured another cup of coffee. Her hands were shaking badly enough that she had to use both of them. Lou appeared at the pass-through like a man surfacing from underwater, and he looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before, something between horror and what might, in a different context, have been awe. She carried the cup back to Dominic Viscari's table, set it down without spilling it, and went back to work. She did not think about what she had just done. Thinking about it would make it real, and making it real would make it terrifying. And if it became terrifying, she would have to feel it, and she could not afford to feel anything right now. She had a 4-hour shift left, a hospital visit after that, 2 phone calls to insurance representatives who would not help her, and somewhere in between all of that, she needed to figure out how to cover the $340 she was short on rent. Dominic Viscari drank his second cup of coffee in silence, left a $100 bill on the table, enough to cover 30 coffees, and walked out without another word. The trucker near the window let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere very deep in his body. The 2 nurses started talking again, their voices pitched too high and too fast. Lou came out from behind the counter and stood next to Naomi at the register and said, very quietly, "You know who that is?" "I know who he is," she said. "Then you know you might want to think about Lou." She turned to look at him. "I'm fine." She was not fine. She was the furthest thing from fine. But she had 11 tables to clear and the lunch rush would start in 40 minutes, and her mother's oxygen levels had been low yesterday, and there was absolutely no space in her life right now for the luxury of being afraid. She drove to St. Mercy General after her shift with the windows down because the AC had stopped working in the spring and she hadn't had the money to fix it. The hospital was 16 blocks east of the diner, close enough that she knew every traffic light by its timing, knew exactly where to park so she didn't have to feed a meter, knew which elevator was fastest and which nurses worked which floors and which doctors were most likely to actually answer questions. Her mother's name was Ruth Hale, and she was 61 years old, and she was dying of idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, which was a medical term for her lungs slowly replacing themselves with scar tissue until there wasn't enough real lung left to pull oxygen out of the air. There was a treatment, pirfenidone, combined with a supplementary infusion protocol that the specialist at the university hospital had identified 18 months ago, that would not cure her but would slow the progression significantly. Buy time. Real time. A year, maybe 2, maybe more. The treatment cost $11,000 for the first course. The insurance company had denied the claim 3 times. Ruth was sitting up in the bed when Naomi came in, which was a good sign. On bad days, she didn't sit up. On bad days, her lips went slightly blue, and the numbers on the monitor above her head moved in the wrong direction, and Naomi sat in the chair beside the bed and held her hand and did the only thing she could do, which was stay. "You look terrible," Ruth said. "Thank you, Mom." "Did you eat?" "Yes." Ruth looked at her with the particular accuracy of a woman who had been reading her daughter's face for 34 years. "What happened?" Naomi sat down and told her about Dominic Viscari. She told it the way she told most stories to her mother, stripped of the scarier parts, the trembling hands, the way Carver had taken that one step forward. But Ruth was not a woman who missed much, and by the time Naomi finished the edited version, her mother was quiet in a way that meant she was reassembling the real version in her head. "You stood up to him," Ruth said. "I told him not to throw things at me." "That's the same thing." Ruth looked out the window for a moment. "Naomi, that man, I know. People don't just—" "I know, Mom." She reached over and covered her mother's hand with hers. Ruth's hand was thinner than it used to be. It had lost the particular weight that hands get from a lifetime of physical work. Nothing's going to happen. He left. He's not going to think about me again. She believed this because she needed to believe it, and for the rest of that evening, sitting in the chair beside her mother's bed while Ruth slept, and the monitor above her head beeped its quiet mechanical reassurance, she told herself it was probably true. She drove home at 9:30, walked up the stairs of her building because the elevator was broken again, and sat down on the edge of her bed in her work clothes without turning on the lights. She thought about the way the room had gone silent. She thought about Dominic Vescari sitting back down. She thought about the $100 bill, which she had not kept, which she had split between the other servers because she didn't want his money in her pocket, a decision she now recognized as perhaps the most expensive principle she had ever exercised. She lay back on the bed without taking her shoes off and stared at the ceiling and thought about how $11,000 was not an abstract number. It was not a big number in the way that the national debt was a big number, too large to actually feel. $11,000 was a number she could picture clearly. She had been $11,000 close and $11,000 away, and the distance between those two positions was the distance between her mother breathing and her mother dying. She fell asleep with her shoes on and her uniform still damp from the coffee. He came back the next morning. She saw him before he sat down, saw the black car outside, saw Carver hold the door open, saw the booth in the back left corner that had been empty when she arrived, suddenly become the booth that mattered most in the room. He was alone this time, if you didn't count Carver standing near the entrance with the posture of furniture that was paying close attention. He ordered black coffee and eggs over easy and wheat toast, which she did not expect. She had expected him to order something that announced itself, something expensive or obscure or requiring special accommodation. He ordered eggs over easy and said please, which she also did not expect. She brought the food. He ate it. He didn't try to talk to her. He left another large bill and walked out. The third day, he ordered oatmeal. She set it in front of him and he said without looking up from the table, "You still work here." "I still work here," she said. "I would have thought you'd quit." He looked up. His eyes were dark and heavy, the eyes of a man who didn't sleep well or hadn't slept well for a very long time. Or transferred. Most people, after something like that, they'd find reasons not to come back. "I need the job," she said. He looked at her steadily. There was something in his expression she didn't know how to read. Not the cold calculation she had expected, not the rage from the first morning. Something more like curiosity. It made her uncomfortable in a different way than fear did. "Most people need their jobs too," he said. "Doesn't stop them from running." She picked up the empty coffee cup from the previous customer's table. "I don't run." "No," he said, almost to himself. "You don't." She walked away before he could say anything else. He came back the fourth day, and the fifth. Always the same booth. Always alone except for Carver at the door. Always ordering something ordinary. The kind of food that didn't announce itself. The kind of food that reminded you of eating in a kitchen somewhere. He tipped well, but not outrageously, as if he had recalibrated after the first morning and understood that the $100 bill had landed wrong. On the sixth day, he asked her a question. "How long have you been working here?" She paused. Considered whether answering was an agreement to something, decided it wasn't. 6 years. Before that, a hospital cafeteria. Before that, a hotel restaurant. "You like working in places like this?" he said. It wasn't entirely a question. "I like working." He was quiet for a moment. "My mother used to make oatmeal," he said. He said it the way people say things they've been carrying for a while and have finally just put down. "Not like this. She used it with brown sugar and these dried cherries she'd buy from a Polish market on Kemper Street. I haven't thought about that in—" He stopped. "I don't know how long." Naomi didn't say anything. She had learned in 6 years of working in places like this that sometimes people talking to you didn't actually need a response. Sometimes they just needed a room that wasn't their own and a person who wasn't going to do them any favors. "You don't ask me questions," he said. "It's not my business. Everyone else asks questions." His voice had an edge to it that wasn't quite bitterness. "They ask what they think I want to hear mostly, or they ask because they're trying to figure out what I want." "I know what you want," she said. "Oatmeal and black coffee." Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile, not quite. But the hard topography of his face rearranged itself slightly, and for just a moment he looked like something other than what she knew him to be. "What's your name?" he asked. She told him. "Naomi." He said it once, like he was filing it somewhere. "I'm Dominic." "I know who you are," she said. The same word she had said to Lou, but different this time. Not defensive, just honest. He looked at her steadily. "And you're still here." "And I'm still here," she agreed, and went to check on her other tables. That night, she sat in Ruth's room and didn't tell her mother about the conversations. She sat in the chair beside the bed and held Ruth's hand and listened to the sound of the oxygen machine and thought about a man who ate oatmeal alone in a diner booth and talked about his mother's Polish market cherries with the voice of someone excavating something very deep and very old. She thought about how dangerous that was. Not the violence of it. She had already processed the violence, had already slotted it into the category of things she was not going to let destroy her. This was a different kind of dangerous, the kind that came from a person starting to seem human. She had grown up in this city. She knew what Dominic Viscari's organization had built itself on, knew the neighborhoods, knew the stories that circulated in the low registers of every conversation about what happened to people who got pulled into the orbit of men like him. She told herself she was a waitress. She brought oatmeal. He talked. She didn't engage beyond what was polite. There were lines and she was not crossing them. But on the 7th morning, when she walked into the diner and saw the black car outside and felt something shift in her chest that was not quite dread, when she recognized that the shift was closer to the opposite of dread, she sat for a moment in the driver's seat of her car in the parking lot and had a very honest conversation with herself about what that meant. It didn't mean anything, she told herself. He was a customer. She was tired. She was lonely in the specific way that people become lonely when every waking moment is organized around someone else's survival. She was looking for a conversation that wasn't about bills or medications or insurance forms, and he happened to be providing one. That was all it was. She got out of the car and went to work. He was already in his booth. He looked up when she came in, and she hated that she noticed, that something in his posture changed when she came through the door. A very slight settling, as if something he had been bracing against had been removed. "Morning," he said. "Morning." She reached for her order pad. "The usual?" "Yeah." He paused. "How's your mother?" She went very still. He saw it. His expression didn't change. "I had someone look into things," he said. "After the first morning. It's what I do. I look into things." A pause. "I'm not telling you this to threaten you. I'm telling you because I'm not going to pretend I don't know." She stood at the edge of his table with her order pad and her pen and looked at him for a long time. She thought about the math again, the specific cold arithmetic of being known by a man like this, of having your name in a file somewhere, of your mother's name being in that file. "She's not good," she said finally. "She's not getting worse this week, but she's not good." He nodded. He looked down at the table. "The treatment they want, the specialist at University General." Her jaw tightened. "You looked that up too." "Yes." "Then you know the number." "I know the number." The silence between them was different from all the other silences. It had shape and pressure, and she could feel exactly what he was not saying, and she knew, in the way you know things in your body before you know them in your head, that whatever came next was going to cost her something she couldn't afford to lose. "I don't want your money," she said. "I haven't offered any." "You're going to." He looked up at her. "Maybe," he said, "but not the way you're thinking." She wrote down oatmeal, black coffee on her pad, tore the slip, and walked to the kitchen window without saying another word. Lou was standing at the grill, and she handed him the slip and stood there for a moment with her hand flat on the counter and her eyes on the middle distance. "He's going to offer to pay for your mom's treatment, isn't he?" Lou said. It wasn't a question. "Probably." Lou flipped something on the grill. "And you're going to say no." "Obviously." "Naomi." He waited until she looked at him. "Your mom has maybe 4 months before that treatment stops being able to help. The window closes. The specialist said so." "I know what the specialist said." "So what's the plan?" She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the order slip on the counter. Then she looked at booth number 7 in the back left corner, where Dominic Vescari was sitting alone eating oatmeal with no brown sugar and no dried cherries from a Polish market that probably didn't exist anymore. And she thought about how every single day she woke up and did the math and came up with the same answer, which was that there was no answer. "I don't have a plan," she said. She picked up the coffee carafe and walked back to his table. And that was the morning that everything changed. Not dramatically, not with the violence of the first morning, but quietly, the way the most irreversible things always happen. Quietly and without any way to go back. She didn't know yet that in 3 weeks, Dominic Vescari would disappear from the diner for the first time since he had started coming. She didn't know that the reason he disappeared would be the thing that put her mother in a room that smelled like disinfectant and fear, or that the phone call she received on a Thursday afternoon would force her to make a choice between her principles and her mother's life, and that by the time she made it, the choice would already be half made for her. She didn't know any of this. She only knew that she refilled his coffee, and he said thank you. And she noticed again the sound of those 2 simple words in his particular voice, and she turned around before he could see whatever was happening on her face. 3 weeks. That was how long Dominic Vescari came to the Anchor Diner every single morning before he disappeared. In those 3 weeks, Naomi learned things about him the way you learn things about bad weather. Not because you wanted to, but because it kept showing up and eventually you started paying attention to the patterns. She learned that he took his coffee black, but always let it cool for exactly 2 minutes before drinking it. She learned that he ate slowly, methodically, like a man who had spent decades eating fast and had recently decided to stop. She learned that he was left-handed, that he checked his phone with the particular weariness of someone who dreaded every notification, and that on days when he came in before 7, he was always in a worse mood than days when he came in after. She also learned, against every instinct she had spent 34 years sharpening, that he was funny. Not perform funny. Not the calculated charm of a man who had learned that humor was another tool for getting what he wanted. He was funny the way tired people are funny, the dark, sideways kind of funny that didn't announce itself, and sometimes made you laugh before you realized you'd done it. "You know what the difference is between this place and every restaurant I own?" he said one morning, midway through his 2nd week. She didn't ask him what it was. She had learned that not asking was its own form of language with him. He told her anyway. "In my places, nobody ever looks me in the eye when they bring the food. They set it down and they look at the table. Like if they make eye contact, they'll turn to stone." He poked at his eggs. "You look me in the eye." "That bother you?" "No," he said. "It's just different." She thought about saying something. She decided against it. She picked up the carafe and walked away. And she could feel his eyes on her back the whole way to the counter, and she did not turn around. That was the architecture of their mornings. He talked in pieces. She mostly didn't respond. But the pieces accumulated the way sediment accumulates, and by the end of the 3rd week she knew more about Dominic Vescari than she had ever intended to know. She knew about his daughter. Her name was Carla. She was 38, lived in Portland, Oregon, and had not spoken to her father in 6 years. He mentioned her the way people mention open wounds, briefly, obliquely, and with a careful neutrality that was doing a lot of heavy lifting over a lot of pain. Carla had a son named Marcus, who was 4 years old. Dominic had never met him. He said this to his coffee cup rather than to Naomi, and she pretended not to hear it, which was the kindest thing she could think to do. She knew about his son Adrian. Adrian she didn't learn about through words. She learned about Adrian through what Dominic didn't say, through the way his jaw tightened when his phone lit up with certain numbers, through the way he once picked up a call and said 3 words and hung up, and then sat completely still for 45 seconds with his hand flat on the table before he picked up his fork again. She learned about Adrian the way you learn about the weather before a storm. You feel the pressure change before you see the sky. And somewhere in the accumulation of all of this, the eggs and the oatmeal and the cold coffee and the oblique confessions, something happened that she could not entirely explain and refused to examine directly. She started looking for the black car, not consciously, not with intention. But in the morning when she turned into the parking lot, her eyes went to the far corner first, where he parked, and when the space was empty, she had a feeling that she identified for a long time as relief before she was forced to admit that it was closer to the opposite. Then he stopped coming. A Monday. He simply wasn't there. She set up her tables, ran her section, worked through the morning rush and the lunch crowd in the dead mid-afternoon hour, and the booth in the back left corner stayed empty. She told herself this was the best possible outcome. She told herself the 3 weeks of conversation had been an aberration that was now corrected, a pressure system passing through. She told herself she was glad. Tuesday, the booth was empty. Wednesday. The booth was empty, and Lou watched her check the parking lot through the window twice in 1 hour and said nothing, which was the loudest thing he could have done. "Don't," she said without looking at him. "I'm just standing here," Lou said. "Don't do that either." On Wednesday night, she sat next to her mother's bed, and Ruth looked at her with those 20/20 maternal eyes and said, "You're somewhere else tonight." "I'm right here. Your body is." Ruth shifted against her pillows. Her breathing was audible in the way it had gotten audible over the last few months, a low, effortful sound beneath every other sound. "Naomi, that man, Mom, I'm not finished." Ruth's voice was firm in the way it got when she had been saving something up. "I asked around. People talk, even in hospitals. I know who he is. I know what he is." She paused, let the oxygen machine fill the silence. "I also know that you've been going to work with a different look on your face for 3 weeks, and now it's gone and you're sitting here pretending it isn't." Naomi looked at her hands in her lap. "Nothing happened," she said. "He was a customer. He stopped coming. End of story." Ruth looked at her for a long time. "What did he say to you?" "Nothing." "Naomi." "Nothing that meant anything." She looked up. "He ate breakfast and he talked and I listened and that's all. That's the whole story." Ruth was quiet. The machine breathed between them. Then her mother said softly, "Be careful." "Of what?" "He's gone." "Of the fact that you're talking about him like someone who isn't gone." Naomi drove home with the windows down in the dark, and the city moved past her in its nighttime languages. The lit storefronts and the dark doorways and the particular quality of light that comes off pavement that's still warm from the day. And she drove and didn't think about anything and got home and sat in her car in the parking structure for 7 minutes before going inside. He came back on a Thursday morning, 11 days after he disappeared. He looked like 11 days of bad decisions made in a row. He was wearing the same caliber of suit, but it sat differently on him, like he'd lost weight or sleep or both. His eyes had the specific flatness of a man who had been having conversations he didn't want to have, and when he sat down in the booth, he didn't pick up the menu. He just sat there looking at the table until she came over. "Black coffee," he said. "That it?" He looked up. Something moved through his expression. Not quite relief, too complicated for that, but something adjacent to it. "Yeah, that's it." She brought the coffee. She set it down. She turned to go. "I was dealing with something," he said. "You don't have to explain yourself to me." "I know that." A pause. "I'm explaining anyway." She turned back around. She looked at him. He looked like a man who had been eating in cars and sleeping on bad information and running on the particular fuel of men who have built their entire lives on the premise that forward momentum is the same thing as being fine. "Are you okay?" she said, and hated herself for asking. "No." He said it simply, without drama. "But I'm here." "Yeah." She looked at him for one more second than she should have. "You're here." She went back to work. He sat in the booth for 2 hours, nursing 3 cups of coffee, and when he finally left, he had written something on the back of a business card and left it under his cup. She almost threw it away without reading it. She picked it up instead and turned it over, and in handwriting that was larger than she expected from a man with hands that size. It said, "Your mother's name is Ruth. The treatment window is closing. I want to help. No conditions. Let me." She stood at the counter for a long time with the card in her hand. Then she put it in her apron pocket and went to clear his table. She thought about it for 4 days. She did not think about it the way you think about good options or reasonable choices. She thought about it the way you think about a door in a burning building, something that represents both exit and risk, and that you can't look at directly without your vision going strange around the edges. The money itself she could almost rationalize. People accepted help. People accepted gifts. Her entire moral architecture was not so rigid that she couldn't distinguish between a debt and a kindness. What she couldn't rationalize, what kept her awake at 2 a.m. in her apartment listening to a city that never quite went silent, was the question of what a man like Dominic Viscari wanted. Because men like him always wanted something. She had grown up near enough to the edges of the world he operated in to understand its fundamental grammar. Power was not given freely. Money was not moved without expectation. Every act of generosity in his universe was a contract written in invisible ink, and you didn't discover the terms until it was already too late to renegotiate. She told herself this. She repeated it with precision. And then on the fourth night, at 11:47 p.m., her phone rang, and it was St. Mercy General, and the night nurse's voice was the carefully calm voice of medical professionals who have learned to deliver bad news without inflection, and the words she heard were oxygen saturation, significant drop, we think you should come in. She drove those 16 blocks in 8 minutes. Ruth was awake when she got there, which was something, but her lips had the bluish cast that Naomi had learned to read like a weather report, and the numbers on the monitor above her head were speaking clearly to anyone who knew the language. The doctor on call was a young woman with tired eyes, who took Naomi into the hallway and told her that the progression had accelerated and that the window for the treatment protocol had moved up significantly. They were looking at weeks, not months, and even weeks was optimistic. Naomi stood in the hospital hallway at midnight and listened to the doctor's voice and looked at the far end of the hallway where there was a window with a parking structure beyond it and the orange glow of the city beyond that. And she thought about $11,000 the way you think about water when you are very, very thirsty. She went back into her mother's room and held Ruth's hand until her mother fell asleep. Then she sat in the chair and took the business card out of her wallet, where she had been carrying it without deciding why, and she looked at it for a long time. The next morning she was at the diner at 6:30, an hour before her shift. She sat in booth 7 and she waited. He came at 7:09. He saw her in his booth before he was fully through the door, and his pace changed. Something in him registering and reordering, and he walked over and stood at the edge of the table with his coat still on. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She put the card on the table between them. "Tell me what no conditions means." He looked at the card, then at her. "It means what it says." "Nothing means what it says with you. That's not an insult. That's just the world you live in." Something shifted in his expression. Not offense, something more complicated. "You're right," he said, "about the world I live in, but I'm telling you, this is different." "Why?" "Because—" He stopped. Started again. "Because you're the only person who has talked to me like a human being in longer than I can tell you. And I'm not saying that to make you feel responsible for anything. I'm saying it because it's true, and I'm done pretending things that aren't true." "That's very moving," she said. "Now tell me what you actually want." He looked at her steadily. "Nothing." "Dominic, I want nothing from you. I want your mother to get the treatment. That's it." "And when the treatment is done, when she's better? What do you want then?" "Nothing." "You keep your organization running by doing things for nothing?" "No." His voice was flat. "But this isn't my organization. This is me. There's a difference. You want me to believe that?" "Yes." "Why should I?" He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the table. He looked like a man choosing between several versions of a sentence and discarding each one until he found the one that was actually true. "Because I have more money than I'll ever be able to spend," he said. "Because I have a grandson I've never met and a daughter who won't take my calls. Because I have a son who looks at me like I'm the only version of a human being worth being, and that version is—" He stopped. His jaw tightened. "I look at him sometimes, and I know that everything wrong with him I put there. Every single piece of it." He looked up at her. "I can't fix those things. I don't even know if they're fixable. But this, your mother, the treatment, $11,000, this is something that can just be good. A clean thing. No ledger." She sat across from him and listened to all of this and hated how much it sounded like the truth. "If I find out later there's a condition," she said, "some expectation I didn't know about, some way this comes back around, it won't." "If it does?" "Naomi." He said her name the way he had the first time, like he was filing it somewhere permanent. "It won't." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about her mother's lips going blue. She thought about the parking lot at midnight and the doctor's careful, inflectionless voice. She thought about 4 months of insurance rejection letters stacked on her kitchen counter and the granola bar she'd split with a sleeping woman in a hospital room, and the specific grinding sound of a choice that only has one real option. "I need it done through a medical fund or a foundation," she said. "Something documented, not cash." "Done. I need my mother's doctor to receive it directly. Not me, not through me. Direct." "Done. And if you ever use my mother's name or her situation as something you own—" "I know," he said quietly. "Do you?" "Yes." He held her gaze. "I know." She pushed the card back across the table toward him. Then she stood up, tied her apron, and went to start her shift. She did not cry until she was in the supply closet at 9:15, between the paper towel rolls and the industrial cleaning solution, with her back against the shelf and her hand over her mouth, shaking with something that was not sadness and not relief, but the precise, physical weight of a decision that you cannot take back. Lou found her. He always found her. He stood in the doorway of the supply closet and looked at her and didn't say anything for a moment. "He's going to pay for it," she said. Lou leaned against the doorframe. "Okay. Tell me I'm being stupid." "You're not being stupid. Tell me this is wrong." "Naomi." He crossed his arms. "Your mother is dying. The man has money. You said yes. That's not a moral failure. That's just a thing that happened." "He wants something." "Maybe. Men like him always want something." "Maybe," Lou said again. "But also, maybe not this time." He paused. "Or maybe the thing he wants is just to be looked at like a person. Maybe that's the whole price." She stood in the supply closet and breathed and tried to decide if that made it better or worse, and couldn't quite get there. The money moved within 72 hours. She knew this because Dr. Okafor called her on a Friday morning, audibly bewildered, to confirm that the full amount had been received through a charitable medical foundation and that Ruth Hale could begin the treatment protocol on Monday if she consented. She consented, Naomi told her mother on Friday afternoon, sitting in the chair beside her bed. She told her the truth. Not the edited version, the whole version. She told her about the card and the conversations and the supply closet and the decision and the 72 hours. Ruth was quiet for a long time after. "You accepted help," she finally said. "I accepted help." "From a dangerous man?" "Yes." Ruth looked at her. "How do you feel?" "Like I swallowed something that hasn't finished settling yet." Her mother nodded slowly. "That's probably the right way to feel." She looked out the window. The afternoon light was low and orange through the hospital glass. "Naomi, whatever this man wants from you, he said he doesn't want anything." "And you believe him?" Naomi thought about it, really thought about it, in the way she had been not quite thinking about it for 72 hours. She thought about the card under the coffee cup. She thought about, "I have a grandson I've never met." She thought about the way he had said a clean thing, no ledger, and how it had sounded like a man reading from a list of things he'd never had. "I don't know," she said, "but I think he believes it himself." Ruth reached over and took her hand. Her grip was weaker than it used to be. "Then we move forward." "Then we move forward," Naomi agreed. Ruth started treatment the following Monday. By Thursday, Dr. Okafor was using words like responding and early indicators. By the following week, the number on the monitor above her bed were moving in the right direction for the first time in months. Not dramatically, not miraculously, but steadily, incrementally, the way real things improve. Slowly enough that you have to watch carefully to see it, but undeniably, measurably moving. Naomi came every evening. She sat in the chair. She held her mother's hand. She watched the numbers. And every morning she went to the Anchor Diner and Dominic Vescari sat in booth 7 and ordered breakfast and they talked. And the conversations changed now in ways she couldn't entirely map. He started asking questions instead of just talking. He asked about her childhood, about how she and Ruth had managed after her father left, about what she had wanted to be before the medical bills had restructured her entire life around what was possible. She answered in the abbreviated way she answered most personal questions, giving enough to be polite while keeping the deeper material behind the usual walls. He didn't push. That surprised her. She had expected him to treat information the way she imagined he treated everything, as territory to be acquired. Instead, he received what she offered and didn't reach past it, and something about that particular restraint unsettled her more than pressure would have. "You had a plan once," he said one morning, midway through his 3rd week back. Before all this, everybody has a plan once. What was yours? She thought about lying, decided there was no real point. Nursing school. I wanted to work in pediatrics. He looked at her for a moment. You would have been good at that. Maybe. Not maybe. He said it with a certainty that was oddly specific. You don't flinch at hard things. You just... He searched for the word. Process them. While they're still happening. That's rare. It's not a skill, she said. It's just not having the option to fall apart. That's what all skills are, he said, and she didn't have an answer for that. It was on a Tuesday, 4 weeks into Ruth's treatment, that everything cracked open. She came to work in the morning and found a man in a gray suit sitting in booth 7. Not Dominic. A man she had never seen before, clean-featured and somewhere in his early 40s, with eyes that had the specific quality of eyes that have been trained to reveal nothing. He was sitting with his hands folded on the table, and when Naomi approached, he did not look at his menu. Miss Hale, he said. She stopped. I'm going to need you to tell me who you are before this conversation goes any further. My name is Adrian Viscari, he said. I'm Dominic's son. Please sit down. She didn't sit down. What do you want? Adrian looked at her with those carefully blank eyes, and the particular patience of a man who is accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room and finds no need to announce it. I want to understand what my father is doing, he said, and I think you might be able to help me with that. I'm a waitress, she said. I serve breakfast. You serve my father breakfast. He unfolded his hands and placed them flat on the table, a gesture that was almost reflexively territorial. For 6 weeks. He comes here every morning. He sits in this booth. He tips well and goes home. A pause. My father has not done anything without a reason in 40 years, so I want to know the reason. There's no reason, she said. He likes the oatmeal. Adrian smiled. It was the kind of smile that doesn't travel past the mouth. Miss Hale, I run a significant portion of my father's interests. I've been doing so for 11 years. I know how he moves, how he thinks, how he makes decisions. What I am seeing in the last 6 weeks does not fit any pattern I have observed in 11 years. He leaned forward slightly. That worries me. That's between you and him. Normally, yes. He held her gaze. But he paid $11,000 into a medical account for a woman he met throwing a coffee cup at. So now it's broader than just between him and me. She felt the air in the room change. Not dramatically, just a small, precise shift in temperature. The way it shifts before something that has been approaching for a while finally arrives. You should talk to your father, she said. I've tried. Something moved through Adrian's expression, quickly, like weather passing. He doesn't talk to me the way he used to. He stopped. Different. People change. Not him. The 2 words were short and hard, and she heard something in them that surprised her. Not the confidence she expected, but something closer to fear wearing the mask of confidence. Not in 40 years. Not once. She looked at him across the table and understood, in the way she understood weather and math and the particular body language of men who considered themselves untouchable, that Adrian Viscari was not here to threaten her. Or not only here to threaten her. He was here because something he had built his entire understanding of the world around was moving, and he couldn't find the fault line. I can't help you, she said. Can't or won't? Both. He looked at her for a long moment. He nodded, once, slowly, and picked up his jacket from the seat beside him. My father is a powerful man, he said, standing. That power has kept a great many people safe who are close to him. It has also destroyed a great many people who became inconvenient. He buttoned his jacket. I'm telling you this not as a threat. I'm telling you because I think you're a smart woman, and I think you should understand the geography of where you're standing. I understand the geography fine, she said. He nodded again. Looked at her once more with those trained, empty eyes. I hope so, he said, for everyone's sake. He left without ordering anything, and Naomi stood in the middle of the Anchor Diner with her order pad in her hand and watched the door close behind him, and understood, with the clean, cold certainty of a woman who had been doing hard math for a very long time, that something had just shifted permanently. That afternoon, she called the number on the back of Dominic's card. He picked up on the second ring. Your son was here this morning, she said, a silence that had weight to it. What did he say? Dominic's voice was very quiet. He wanted to know what you're doing. He wanted to know what I am to you. She paused. Dominic, what are you doing? The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 8. Long enough that she could hear background noise on his end, traffic or wind or the sound of a city doing its business. Something I should have done a long time ago, he said. That's not an answer. No. Another pause. It's not. His voice changed, dropped a register. I need you to know, whatever happens in the next few weeks, what I did for your mother has no conditions. That doesn't change. Whatever else changes, that doesn't. The cold settled in her chest. Why would something else change? He didn't answer that directly. Are you at the diner now? I'm at home. Stay home tonight. He said it quietly, but with the specific weight of a sentence that is doing 2 jobs at once, request and warning wearing the same clothes. I'll explain everything tomorrow, at the diner, in the morning. Dominic, tomorrow, he said, in the morning. I promise. She stood in her kitchen with the phone in her hand for a long time after he hung up. She looked at the stack of old insurance letters on the counter. She looked at the kitchen table where she and Ruth used to eat dinner, the 2 of them, every night for the 12 years after her father left. She looked at the city through her window, doing what it always did, existing with complete indifference to the particular human emergencies happening inside it. She thought about Adrian Vescari's eyes, the specific trained blankness of them, the way he had said not in 40 years, not once, and what lived inside those words. She thought about whatever happens in the next few weeks. She thought about a man who ate oatmeal alone and missed his mother's dried cherries from a Polish market and had never once, not once, met his 4-year-old grandson. She thought about how she had spent her whole adult life being the woman who didn't run. And then her phone rang again, and the number on the screen was St. Mercy General, and the cold in her chest became something else entirely. And she picked up and heard the night nurse's careful, inflectionless voice, and the word she heard this time was not oxygen or saturation. The word she heard was Adrian. And the sentence that followed it told her that a man who had left the Anchor Diner that morning without ordering breakfast had spent his afternoon making phone calls, and that one of those phone calls had resulted in a very quiet, very professional review of the charitable foundation that had paid for Ruth Hale's treatment. A review that had, as of 4 o'clock that afternoon, flagged the account and placed the remaining disbursements on hold pending investigation. Her mother's next treatment was scheduled for Thursday. Today was Tuesday. She sat down on the kitchen floor and held the phone and breathed. And the city went on outside her window, and somewhere across it, a man who was changing was running out of time. And somewhere in a hospital, a woman whose lungs were finally starting to heal was going to have to be told that the healing might be stopping. And Naomi Hale sat on her kitchen floor and understood that she had just run out of the option of standing still. She didn't sleep, not a single hour. She sat on the kitchen floor for 20 minutes after the call, then got up because the floor was cold and sitting on it felt like giving something up. And she made coffee. She didn't drink and stood at the window and watched the city do its indifferent nocturnal business until the sky started going gray at the edges. At 5:15 she showered. At 5:40 she was in her car. She didn't go to the diner. She went to St. Mercy General. Ruth was awake when she got there, which meant Ruth already knew, because Ruth had always been the kind of woman who found out things before she was supposed to. She was sitting up in the bed with her hands folded in her lap and her face arranged into the specific stillness of a woman who has spent 61 years learning how to absorb bad news without letting it take her legs out from under her. "Sit down," Ruth said. Naomi sat. "Tell me what happened." Ruth's voice was level. Not calm, level. There's a difference. Calm is the absence of feeling. Level is feeling held in a very tight grip. Naomi told her. All of it. The foundation, the hold, Adrian's visit to the diner, the phone call. She told it the way she told her mother most true things, straight through, no softening, because Ruth had never once in 34 years asked to be protected from the truth, and Naomi had learned early that offering protection to someone who hadn't requested it was just a more complicated form of condescension. When she finished, Ruth was quiet for a moment. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday. That's 40 hours. "Yes." Ruth looked at the window. The sky outside was that particular early morning color that can't decide between gray and blue. "What are you going to do?" I don't know yet. Naomi. I don't know yet, Mom. She leaned forward with her elbows on her knees. I need to talk to Dominic. He said tomorrow morning. He said tomorrow morning before his son went and put a hold on my treatment. Ruth's voice didn't rise. It got quieter, which with Ruth was always the more significant direction. Whatever he intended to explain has probably changed. I know. This is what I was afraid of. Ruth turned from the window. Her eyes were clear and tired and absolutely direct. Not the money. Not the man. This. The moment where you're sitting here at 6 in the morning with 40 hours and nowhere to go because you're connected to something you don't control. I know that. Do you? Because knowing it and sitting in it are two different things. Naomi looked at her mother. She looked at the monitor above her head with its moving numbers and its quiet, mechanical language. She looked at the oxygen line and the IV line and all the infrastructure of modern medicine keeping this specific woman alive. And she thought about how she had spent the last month watching those numbers move in the right direction and how she had not allowed herself to feel relieved because relief was a vulnerability and she couldn't afford vulnerabilities. But she had felt something adjacent to it, something warm and careful and very fragile. And now it was 6 in the morning and that fragile thing was in Adrian Viscari's hands. I have to fix this, she said. How? I don't know yet. Ruth reached out and put her hand over Naomi's. Her grip was stronger than it had been a month ago. That was the treatment. That was the $11,000 and Dominic Viscari's, whatever it was, conscience, loneliness, need, that had moved through a foundation and into a medical account and had spent the last 4 weeks rebuilding her mother's lungs, one incremental measurement at a time. Be careful, Ruth said. The same words as always, but different now. Weighted differently. The way identical words can mean entirely different things depending on what's standing behind them. I will, Naomi said. She drove to the Anchor Diner. It was 6:43 when she got there, which meant she had nearly half an hour before Dominic's usual arrival. She unlocked the side door. Lou had given her a key years ago for emergencies, and went in and made coffee and stood behind the counter in the empty diner and thought. The chairs were still up on the tables. The morning light came through the front windows at a low angle that made everything look amber and provisional, like a film set that hasn't been dressed yet. She looked at booth 7 and thought about every conversation that had happened in it and tried to construct, from those pieces, a map of what she was actually dealing with. Dominic was changing. She believed this. She believed it not because she wanted to believe it, but because she had watched it happen in real time, in increments small enough to be credible. The kind of change that announces itself through what a person orders for breakfast, through the way they hold a coffee cup, through the specific gravity of the silences they allow themselves. She had watched it the way you watch something growing, slowly, without drama, with the daily patience of a person who understands that growth is not an event. Adrian had seen the same thing she had seen. And unlike her, Adrian had not responded to it with anything resembling openness. Adrian had responded to it the way you respond to a structural problem in a building you live in. You don't ask the building what it needs. You shore up the walls. The front door opened at 7:02. Not Dominic, Carver. He came in alone, which she had never seen, and he was not wearing the loose, patient bodyguard posture she had grown accustomed to reading from him across the room. He was wearing the posture of a man delivering something he had been told to deliver and would prefer not to be delivering. He walked to the counter and stood in front of her and put both hands flat on the surface between them. Mr. Viscari won't be coming in this morning, Carver said. Which one? Something moved through Carver's expression, a flicker of something she couldn't entirely read. Dominic, he said. He asked me to give you this. He put an envelope on the counter, her name on the front in that larger-than-expected handwriting. Where is he, she said. I can't tell you that. Can't or won't. Carver looked at her. He had a face like a geological event, all angles and compression, nothing soft anywhere in it. And he had always struck her as a man who dealt in absolute practical terms, who had probably not entertained an abstract thought since sometime in the early 2000s. But right now, looking at her across the counter of the Anchor Diner at 7 in the morning, he had an expression she could only describe as uncomfortable. Both, he said. Miss Hale, open the envelope. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded once. She unfolded it. The handwriting was the same, but the letters were slightly less precise than the card had been, like it had been written faster or under different conditions. Naomi, I know about the hold. I'm dealing with it. The treatment will not be interrupted. I'm making sure of that through other channels. I need you to stay away from the diner for a few days. Not forever. A few days. Things are moving faster than I expected, and I don't want you in the middle of them. I will explain everything when I can. I'm sorry for pulling you into this. That was not something I intended to do. D. She read it twice. Then she put it down on the counter and looked at Carver. What does other channels mean? She said. I can't speak to specifics. Carver. She put her hand on the letter. My mother's next treatment is Thursday. Today is Wednesday. When he says other channels, does that mean my mother is covered? Or does that mean he's working on it? Carver held her gaze. He was clearly a man who did not enjoy this particular type of conversation. She's covered, he said. The arrangement has been moved to a different vehicle. Your mother's Thursday appointment stands. She breathed for a moment, just breathed. And the days after that, she said, covered. For how long? Long enough. He picked up his hands from the counter. Mr. Vescari wanted me to make sure you understood that. Long enough. She looked at the letter. She looked at Carver. She thought about a dozen questions and selected the one that mattered most. Is he safe? She said. Carver's hands paused on their way into his coat pockets. Something in his face shifted, very slightly, very briefly. He's handling things, he said, which was not the same thing. He left. She stood at the counter with the letter in her hand and the empty diner around her and the amber morning light coming through the windows at its provisional angle, and she understood two things simultaneously. The first was that Dominic was not handling things from a position of safety. The second was that staying away from the diner, the one instruction he had given her, was the one thing she was absolutely certain she could not do. She called the number on the card. It rang 7 times and went to voicemail. A recording that was just a tone, no name, no instruction except to leave a message. She didn't leave a message. She called again. Same result. She put the phone in her pocket and stood in the empty diner and thought about geography. She thought about what she knew. She knew Adrian had come to the diner and then made calls. She knew those calls had reached into a foundation account and applied pressure to her mother's treatment. She knew Dominic had responded by moving the arrangement somewhere else and then disappearing. She knew Carver had come alone, which meant Dominic was somewhere without his usual detail, which meant either he had sent them elsewhere or they had gone elsewhere without him. She thought about what Adrian had said. My father has not done anything without a reason in 40 years. What I'm seeing in the last 6 weeks does not fit any pattern. She thought about what Dominic had said on the phone, something I should have done a long time ago. She thought about those 2 statements, and she stood in the middle of the Anchor Diner and put them together and felt the resulting shape. And the shape was worse than she had been prepared for. Lou came in at 7:30 and found her standing behind the counter with the letter in her hand and no customers in the room and all the chairs still up on the tables. You want to tell me? He said. She handed him the letter. He read it. He read it again. He set it on the counter and looked at her over it with the expression of a man who has spent his life in close proximity to the edges of things he wanted no part of and has developed over that time a very accurate internal alarm system. He's going to the feds, Lou said. She looked at him. That's what other channels means, Lou said. That's what moving faster than expected means. That's what all of it. He gestured at the letter. He's going to cooperate with federal authorities and dismantle his own organization, and Adrian found out. She stood very still. Lou, I've lived in this city for 53 years, he said. I know what this looks like. I know the shape of it. He crossed his arms over his chest. Naomi, when men like Dominic Vescari decide to cooperate with the government, the window between the decision and the consequences is very, very short. And the consequences come from inside, not outside. Not from prosecutors or federal agents, from the people who built the thing with him. She sat down on a stool. His son, she said. His son, Lou agreed. They looked at each other across the counter. You should have told me, she said. Not angry, just stating a fact. Would you have wanted him to? She thought about it honestly. No. Right. Lou uncrossed his arms. But he also should have been faster. Whatever he was planning, going back and forth to this diner for 6 weeks while he was deciding. That 6 weeks, Adrian had to figure out the shape of something. He paused. Men who run organizations like his don't stop running them because they have breakfast somewhere nice. Adrian would have known that. He would have been watching. He's been watching the whole time, she said. Probably. She thought about 6 weeks of black cars in parking lots. She thought about Carver at the door. She thought about a man sitting alone in a booth ordering oatmeal and eggs over easy and talking about dried cherries from a Polish market. And she thought about how visible all of that had been, how completely uncharacteristically visible. And she understood with cold clarity that the visibility had not been a mistake. It had been the thing. The act of being visible, of doing something ordinary in a public place, repeatedly, without the apparatus of power arranged around it. That had been Dominic Vescari practicing being something other than what he was. And Adrian had watched him practice and understood that the practice was a kind of death. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't pick up. She picked up. "Miss Hale." The voice was Adrian's. Polished even, the way smooth surfaces are not naturally smooth but have been made that way. "I want to apologize for the disruption to your mother's care. That was a measure of pressure, not a permanent action. I want you to know it's been resolved." She said nothing. "Miss Hale, I'm here. I'd like to meet with you, today, if possible." "I think we said everything we needed to say yesterday." "No." A brief pause. "I don't think we did." Another pause. "I think there are things my father has told you or not told you, which may be more relevant, that you deserve to understand clearly, from someone who has been in this organization for 11 years rather than 6 weeks. She looked at Lou. He was watching her face and reading it the way he always read it, with the practiced accuracy of a decade of working next to her. "Where?" she said. Lou's eyes went sharp. Adrian gave her an address. A restaurant, Midtown, noon, public place. She noted this. It meant he wanted a conversation, not a confrontation. Or it meant he wanted her to think that. "I'll be there," she said. She hung up, and Lou said immediately, "No." "Lou, no. Naomi, no. You cannot go sit across from that man alone in a restaurant. It's public. Public doesn't mean safe when the person across the table from you is. What's the alternative?" She looked at him. "I sit here and wait for someone to tell me what's happening. I go home and wait for Dominic to call back. My mother has a treatment Thursday, and whatever is happening between those two men is happening right now, today, and I have no information and no leverage and no—" She stopped, breathed. "I need information, Lou, that's all. Information." He looked at her for a long time. "You take your phone," he said finally. "You keep it on the table where you can see it. You text me the address, and you text me when you walk in and when you walk out. Okay? And if anything, I'll text you," she said. "I promise." The restaurant was the kind of place that spent money on its silence. Heavy tablecloths, well-spaced tables, the kind of ambient sound design that kept conversations private, not through loudness, but through a carefully engineered murmur that covered everything. Adrian was already there when she arrived, sitting with a glass of water and no menu, wearing a charcoal suit and the same trained blank expression she had catalogued at the diner. He stood when she approached. She noted this. She sat. He sat. She put her phone on the table to the right of the water glass. He looked at it briefly and said nothing. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You said there were things I deserved to understand." "Yes." He picked up his water glass and set it down without drinking from it, a gesture that struck her as something he did when he was deciding where to begin. "My father intends to cooperate with federal authorities. I assume you know this." I suspected it. "He has been in contact with a federal organized crime task force for approximately 3 weeks, during which time he has been coming to your diner every morning." He looked at her steadily. "I want you to understand what that means. Not for him, for you." "Tell me." "It means that for 3 weeks, you have been the last person my father saw before meeting with federal agents. It means your name is in a file now. It means that when this organization responds to what my father is doing, and it will respond, this is not a question of if, your name and your face and your mother's medical history are all already documented in a context that connects you to him." She sat with this for a moment. She kept her face level. He didn't tell you that, Adrian said. It was not a question. No, she said. No. He set down the water glass. My father he was not a careless man. For 40 years, he was the least careless man I have ever known. But in the last 6 weeks, something happened to his judgment, and I think you are standing at the center of it without fully understanding the geometry. Your father is trying to change, she said. Adrian looked at her. Something crossed his face that she hadn't expected. Not contempt, which was what she had braced for, but something that looked briefly, unguardedly, like grief. My father, he said slowly, has been telling me since I was 8 years old that the only language the world speaks is power. That mercy is weakness. That sentiment is a liability. He built everything he has on those principles. He built me on those principles. A pause. You cannot rebuild a man in 6 weeks over oatmeal. Maybe not, she said. But you can start. Starting is not the same as finishing. No, but it's not nothing either. He looked at her for a long moment. She held his gaze. She thought about what Lou had said about the shape of things, and she thought about what she was looking at across this table. And the shape she was seeing was not what she had expected. She had expected cold strategy. She was looking at something more complicated. She was looking at a son who was terrified, not of federal authorities, not of the dismantling of an organization, of the specific, intimate violence of a father who had spent decades teaching one version of the world and was now, with no warning and no explanation, announcing that the whole lesson had been wrong. Adrian, she said, his name, just that, and she watched him register the shift of it. A waitress using his first name across a restaurant table. He didn't tell her to stop. What he's doing, she said carefully, is not a betrayal of you, whatever it feels like. He's going to testify against the people who built this with him. Adrian's voice didn't rise, but it thinned. Men who trusted him. Who trusted me, by extension. Men who, when they find out what he intends, he stopped. You don't understand this world. I understand consequences, she said. I've been living inside consequences my whole life. Not these consequences. Then tell me. She leaned forward slightly. Tell me what happens. He looked at her. For just a moment his composure slipped. Not dramatically, not in any way that anyone watching from a nearby table would have seen. But she was close enough to see it, the brief, involuntary crack in the trained surface. And what lived under it was not the cold strategic calculation she had been constructing him from. What lived under it was a man who had been told the rules of the world so completely and so early that he had never once considered the possibility that the rules might have been wrong. Then it was gone, sealed back over, smooth. The organization has individuals who handle internal problems, he said. My father is now an internal problem. He picked up the water glass. And because he has spent 6 weeks in a public diner talking to you, you have become an associated risk. The words landed cleanly. No softening, just the cold geography of it. She sat with the words. She did not let her hands move or her face move. She did the thing she had always done, the processing while it's happening that Dominic had identified as a skill she'd built from the absence of alternatives. What are you telling me to do? She said. I'm telling you to walk away from my father. And if I don't, then I cannot promise that the people who see you as an associated risk will be persuaded to see you differently. He set the glass down. Miss Hale, I want to be very clear. I am not making a threat. I am describing a situation as it exists. My father created this situation. I am trying to give you the opportunity to step outside of it before it closes. She looked at him across the table and thought about a woman in a hospital bed with stronger hands than she'd had a month ago, and a monitor with numbers moving in the right direction. She thought about Dominic Viscari sitting in a booth eating oatmeal and talking about something small and true. She thought about a 4-year-old boy named Marcus in Portland, Oregon, who had never met his grandfather. What happens to your father? She said. Adrian said nothing. If he testifies, she said, if he goes through with it, what happens to him? That depends on how quickly things move. Adrian's voice was very quiet now. And on decisions that haven't been made yet. Whose decisions? He looked at her. Yours, she said. He looked at the table. She stood up. She picked up her phone. She looked down at him for a moment. This man in his charcoal suit with his trained empty eyes that weren't quite as empty as he needed them to be. And she thought about something Dominic had said weeks ago in the amber morning light of the diner. I look at him sometimes and I know that everything wrong with him I put there. Every single piece of it. Your father is trying to stop being the thing he made you from, she said quietly. I think some part of you understands that. I think that's why you came to me instead of just acting. She held his gaze. I think you're here because you're still deciding. She walked out of the restaurant into the midday light. She texted Lou. Out. Walking to the car. She walked half a block before her legs told her they needed a moment, and she stopped in a doorway and stood there with her back against the frame and breathed, and the city moved around her the way it always did, with complete indifference to any individual human emergency occurring within it. She called Dominic's number. This time he picked up on the first ring. Where are you? She said. A pause. I can't. Dominic, I just had lunch with your son. I know what's happening. I know about the federal task force. I know what you didn't tell me. She kept her voice flat. Not angry. Just clear. Where are you? A longer pause. I'm at the warehouse on Delaney and 9th, he said. The one the city condemned in 2019. I've been here since last night. She knew the building. Everyone in this city who had grown up near the edges of his world knew the building on Delaney and 9th. It was a piece of geography that had its own mythology, the kind of place that accumulated stories the way old buildings accumulate water, slowly, in the dark, until the structure starts to show it. Don't move, she said. Naomi, I don't want you anywhere near. Dominic. She said it the way he said her name, filing it. I'm coming. Don't move. She hung up before he could tell her not to, and she walked to her car with the phone in her hand and the city's indifferent noise around her. And she drove toward Delaney and 9th and the condemned building and the man inside it who had started something that was now moving faster than anyone had planned for. She parked on the street half a block down. She sat in the car for a moment. She took stock of what she had. No weapon, no plan, no training in whatever category of situation this was. She had a phone with Lou's number in it and a mother in a hospital bed and 34 years of processing hard things while they were still happening. She got out of the car. The side door of the building was unlocked. She pushed it open and went in, and the smell hit her first, old wood and moisture and something metallic underneath it. And then her eyes adjusted to the interior dimness, and she saw Dominic sitting on a wooden crate in the middle of the ground floor space with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, and 3 phones on the floor beside him, and a look on his face that she had never seen before. Not fear. Something older and heavier than fear. Something that looked like a man finally understanding the full cost of a decision he had already made. He looked up when she came in, and for a moment he just looked at her and she looked at him. And then he said very quietly, You shouldn't be here. I know, she said. Tell me everything. He told her. He had been in contact with the task force for 4 weeks, not 3, as Adrian had said, which meant Adrian's information was slightly old, which might matter later. He had provided preliminary documentation, names, accounts, structures, the particular architecture of 40 years of careful criminal organization. The task force had offered witness protection, full relocation, new identity, the complete erasure of Dominic Vescari, and the construction of someone else in his place. He had been stalling, not because he was uncertain about going forward. He told her this, and she believed him, because the stalling was all over him, in the exhausted set of his shoulders and the 3 phones on the floor and the condemned building. He had been stalling because of Adrian. He's going to be destroyed by this, Dominic said. He said it without sentimentality, which made it worse. Not by the feds, not by the organization, by me, by what I built. He's going to spend the rest of his life as the son of the man who... He stopped. I taught him everything he knows. Everything wrong with him came from me. And now I'm going to burn the only thing I ever gave him. Naomi stood in the middle of the condemned building on Delaney and 9th and looked at this man who had thrown a coffee cup at her 63 days ago, and she thought about what Lou had said, and what Adrian had said, and what Ruth had said. And then she thought about what no one had said yet, which was the true thing underneath all of the other true things. He's going to try to stop you, she said. Yes. Not through the organization, himself. Dominic was quiet. He told me he hasn't decided yet, she said. In the restaurant. He said things that haven't been decided. He met himself. She watched Dominic's face. Adrian is trying to decide whether to... The door behind her opened. Not the side door she had come through. The large freight door at the far end of the space, which swung inward on its rusted hinges with a sound like something tearing, and the light that came through it was the flat gray light of a cloudy afternoon. And standing in it with two men behind him was Adrian Viscari. He was not wearing the charcoal suit anymore. He had changed into something darker. His face was the face from the restaurant minus the last traces of whatever ambivalence she had identified in it, and what had replaced the ambivalence was something terrible and final. He looked at his father. He did not look at Naomi. "I made a decision," Adrian said. The silence in the condemned building on Delaney and Ninth had a specific quality, the quality of a silence that is about to become something else, that is in the last seconds of being silence before it transforms into whatever comes after. Dominic stood up from the wooden crate. He stood up slowly, with the deliberate steadiness of a man who has decided that the thing he is doing next will be the most important thing he has ever done. And he looked at his son across the dusty, dim interior of a building that was already half dead, and he said very quietly, "So did I." And Naomi stood between them and understood, with the cold, clean clarity of a woman who had spent her whole life doing hard math in real time, that the next 30 seconds were going to determine whether any of them walked out of this building at all. The first thing Naomi noticed was the sound of the two men behind Adrian. Not their faces, not their hands, the sound. The particular weighted shift of bodies that have been trained to read a room and respond before thought catches up with instinct. She had never been in a situation like this before, but she had spent 34 years reading rooms, reading the specific body language of people about to do something they couldn't take back. And she read it now in the 2 seconds before anything else happened, and what she read was unambiguous. They were waiting for a signal. Adrian had not given it yet. That was the whole space she had to work with. The gap between the decision he had announced and the signal he hadn't given. 2 seconds, maybe 3. She spent them moving, not away. She moved toward the center of the room, not running, walking, but walking the way you walk when every step is deliberate, putting herself between the freight door and the wooden crate where Dominic had been sitting, making the geometry of the space harder to resolve cleanly. Adrian's eyes tracked her. He hadn't expected her to move toward him, and the half-second of recalibration showed on his face before he sealed it back over. "Miss Hale." His voice was still even, still polished. "Step aside." "No," she said. The word landed in the silence of the condemned building with a flatness that surprised even her. Not heroic, not defiant, just the sound of a woman who had run completely out of sideways options and was now standing in the only direction left. Dominic moved to stand beside her. She felt him more than saw him, the specific warmth and mass of him stepping up to her left, shoulder adjacent, and she thought, abstractly, that this was the first time they had ever stood next to each other, rather than across a table. "Adrian." Dominic's voice was different from any version of it she had heard before, quiet in a way that had nothing to do with deference. "Send them outside." "No, I'm asking you." "You lost the right to ask me things." Adrian's jaw moved, just slightly. "When did you decide? How long have you been—" He stopped, started again. "The federal agents. When?" 4 weeks ago. 4 weeks. Adrian said it like he was testing the weight of it. His hands, she noticed, were at his sides, not moving. That was significant. She filed it. "You sat in that diner for 6 weeks. Before that, 4 weeks with the task force. That's 10 weeks, Dad." The word dad came out wrong, like a word in a language he'd stopped speaking long enough to have lost the natural inflection of it. 10 weeks you let me run things, make decisions, put my name on things. While you were, I know, you know. Adrian's voice thinned, not louder, thinner. "You know what I've done in 10 weeks based on the assumption that you were still, that we were still." He stopped. Something crossed his face. "There are commitments I made, arrangements, on your behalf, on the organization's behalf. When those people find out what you've, I'll deal with it." "You'll deal with it," Adrian laughed. It was a short, entirely mirthless sound. "You're about to disappear under a new name, and you'll deal with it." "Yes." "How?" "By testifying. by giving the task force enough to destroy everything. Adrian's voice finally moved. Not much, but the evenness cracked at the edges, just enough to hear what was underneath it. And what was underneath it was not the cold strategic calculation she had spent the last 48 hours building him from. What was underneath it was something rawer and older, and much more difficult to manage. Every person, every structure, every arrangement that took 40 years to build. You're going to hand all of it to federal prosecutors, and then you're going to disappear. Yes, Dominic said. That's exactly what I'm going to do. Naomi stood between them and breathed. She breathed slowly, deliberately, the way she had breathed in the diner 63 days ago when hot coffee was soaking through her shirt and the room was waiting to see what she would do. She was aware of her heartbeat in an unusually specific way, not racing, but very present, very deliberate, like something that had decided to make itself known. Adrian, she said. He looked at her. The blank trained surface of his eyes had developed a fracture she could see clearly now, a line running through it that had been invisible in the restaurant and was visible now because this space was different. This space was the real room. The restaurant had been a room they were both performing in. This was the room where performance ran out of air. You came here yourself, she said. You didn't send people. You didn't. She gestured slightly at the two men near the freight door. You're here, in person. Why? Adrian said nothing. Because you haven't decided, she said. You told me in the restaurant you had, but you hadn't. You came here because something in you needed to look at him first. She held his gaze. I'm right. A long silence. You don't know what you're talking about, Adrian said. Then give the signal. She kept her voice absolutely level. Give it right now. If I'm wrong, give it. The silence in the condemned building stretched to a length that had its own specific quality. The quality of a held breath, of a room waiting for a thing that was not coming, of time doing something strange at its edges. Adrian did not give the signal. One of the men near the door shifted his weight, just slightly, a small professional adjustment of impatience. Adrian turned his head a fraction, and the man went still again. Dominic spoke. Do you remember? He said, and his voice was quiet enough that she had to concentrate to hear it. The summer you were 11, we drove up to that cabin in the mountains. Just us. Your mother had already left by then. A pause. We fished every morning. You were terrible at it. You dropped every fish you caught because you didn't want to touch them. Another pause. You were so angry at yourself for that. You cried about it one night when you thought I was asleep. You were 11 years old and you cried because you dropped 3 fish. Adrian's jaw was very tight. I told you the next morning, Dominic said, that it didn't matter, that the fish weren't the point. He paused. You asked me what the point was then, and I told you. I told you the point was that you showed up and you tried. That was it, just that. Don't, Adrian said. That was the last true thing I ever told you. Dominic's voice didn't waver. Everything after that was lessons, power and fear, and how to read a room and how to make people understand consequences. I spent 27 years teaching you how to be what I was, and I was very, very good at it. He paused. You were a better student than I was a teacher. Stop. You are exactly what I built, every piece of you, the way you stand, the way you talk, the way you just spent 48 hours dismantling a charitable foundation to put pressure on a sick woman instead of just coming to me directly. I taught you that. Use indirect force. Never give your actual position until you've weakened theirs. His voice was still quiet, but it had a quality now that she had never heard in it before. A rawness that wasn't performance and wasn't sentiment, just the specific sound of truth that has been held in place by force for too long and has finally been released. I am the worst thing that ever happened to you, and I am going to spend the rest of my life knowing that. The two men near the freight door were very still. They were not looking at Adrian. They were looking at each other with the particular expression of men who had signed on for one kind of situation and found themselves in a completely different kind. Adrian had not moved. He was standing in the gray afternoon light from the open freight door with his hands at his sides and his face doing something complicated that he did not appear to have the resources to stop. You don't get to do that, he said. His voice was wrong. Too thick, too uneven, all the polish stripped off it. You don't get to... 27 years and now you stand there and tell me the whole thing was yes, no. Adrian's hand moved. She tensed, but the hand just came up and pressed flat against his own sternum, like a man checking to see if something was still there. No, you don't get to make this into a story about your conscience. You built something. We built something. People depended on it. I depended. He stopped hard. The word depended sat in the air between them. Naomi didn't breathe. I depended on you, Adrian said. Quieter now, stripped. And you sat in a diner for 6 weeks eating oatmeal and deciding to burn everything down, and you never once came to me. You never once said, I know. Why? The word cracked, not loud, but cracked. The way surfaces crack under pressure that's been applied for too long. Why didn't you come to me? Dominic looked at his son. She watched him look at his son, and she saw something pass through his face that she could only describe as the specific expression of a man who has arrived at the answer to a question too late. Because I was afraid, Dominic said, of what you'd become. The silence after that was different from all the previous silences. Adrian stood in the freight door light, and his face did not move for a long time, and she watched him and thought about what it cost a person to hold their face still when something was happening underneath it that had been building for 27 years and had been given no direction, no language, no permission to be what it actually was. Then one of the men near the door moved and everything changed. Not Adrian's signal. The man moved on his own, a professional recalculation. The room had changed in ways he hadn't been briefed for, and he was defaulting to the original instruction, which was a simple and brutal instruction, and he took 2 steps toward the center of the room before Naomi moved. She moved before she thought about moving. She stepped directly into the man's path, and he stopped because stopping was easier than going through her, and the half-second of his stopping gave Adrian time to turn and say one word, sharp and flat and absolute, don't. The man stopped completely. The second man had not moved. Adrian turned back to the room. He looked at his father. He looked at Naomi, who was standing between a large professional with very practical hands and the man who had thrown a coffee cup at her 63 days ago, and she wondered abstractly what she must look like to him. This woman in a diner uniform who kept putting herself in the middle of things that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with what she couldn't walk away from. You would have stepped in front of him, Adrian said to her. Not a question. I did step in front of him, she said. He could have... I know. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Why? She thought about it, really thought about it, in the 3 seconds she had. Then she said, because your father once paid $11,000 for a woman he barely knew because he was trying, for the first time in his life, to do something clean. And that matters, even if it's inconvenient, even if it's complicated. She held his gaze. Even if it costs something. Adrian looked at his father again. Dominic said nothing. He let the silence hold everything he didn't have words for. The freight door was still open. The flat gray afternoon light came through it at a low angle, falling across the dusty floor of the condemned building in a rectangle of cold illumination. Naomi could hear the city outside. Traffic, a distant horn, the low-frequency hum of a place doing its continuous business. She could hear her own heartbeat, still that deliberate, steady presence. She could hear Adrian breathing. He was breathing harder than he should have been for a man who had not moved more than 10 steps in the last 10 minutes. There's protection for you too, Dominic said quietly. I negotiated it before I contacted anyone. If you want it. Full relocation, new identity. It was the first thing I asked for. Adrian stared at him. The first thing, Dominic said again, before anything else. Before I gave them a single name or a single document, I asked them to include you. A long pause. You should have told me that, Adrian said. I know. 10 weeks ago, you should have... I know, Adrian. Dominic's voice was rough at the edges now. Not breaking, but rough. Like something that has been held together by will alone and is beginning to show the cost of that. I was afraid of getting it wrong again. I have been getting it wrong with you since you were 8 years old, and I didn't know how to... He stopped. I should have come to you. I should have said, this is what I'm thinking. This is why. This is what I want for you if you'll have it. I should have given you the choice instead of... He gestured at the building around them, at the 2 men near the door, at the whole complicated wreckage of the last 48 hours. Instead of this, the 2 men near the freight door were not moving. She watched them without looking directly at them. A peripheral awareness of their stillness, their recalibration. They were professionals. They were reading the room. The room had become something that their original briefing had not accounted for. Adrian walked to the wooden crate where his father had been sitting, and he sat down on it. He sat down heavily, the way people sit when they've been standing under enormous weight and have finally been given somewhere to put it down. He put his elbows on his knees and his hands over his face, and he sat there. Dominic took one step toward him. Adrian's voice came through his hands. "Don't." Dominic stopped. Adrian's hands dropped. He looked up. His face was raw in a way she had never seen it and would never have predicted it could be. All the trained surface stripped away, and what was underneath was a man who was much younger than 43, who was sitting in the rubble of an entire architecture of the world and trying to find where to put his feet. "Marcus," he said. Dominic frowned. "What?" "Carla's boy. My nephew." Adrian looked at his hands. "I've met him twice. He's 4. He doesn't know—" He stopped. "He doesn't know what we are, what any of this is." He looked up at his father. "If I go with you, if I take the protection, he would—" He couldn't finish it. "He would know his uncle," Dominic said, carefully. "And his grandfather, eventually." Adrian looked at him for a long time. Then he turned and looked at the 2 men near the freight door, and the look he gave them was different from any look she had seen from him. Not the polished, trained signal of authority, but something more direct, more personal, more honest. "You need to go," he said to them. "Both of you. Right now." The first man, the one who had moved, the one she had stepped in front of, looked at Adrian steadily. "Mr. Vescari." "This is over," Adrian said. "Walk away. I'm telling you to walk away." A pause. "There are other people who are going to want a different outcome. You go to them. You tell them I handled it. It went wrong. It's done. You give yourself distance." Another pause. "Or you stay, and what comes next comes for you too." The man looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at the second man. Some communication passed between them that had no words. They walked out through the freight door and into the flat, gray afternoon. The door stayed open behind them. Naomi stood in the condemned building on Delaney and 9th and listened to the sound of footsteps on concrete fading, and then the sound of a car, and then just the city, doing its continuous, indifferent business. She looked at Dominic. He was looking at his son. Adrian was looking at the open freight door with an expression that she recognized, that she had worn herself, in bathrooms and supply closets and cars and parking structures at midnight. The expression of a person who has made a decision that has just become real in a way that decisions are not real until the moment after they are made, when you understand for the first time the full weight of what you have set in motion. She took out her phone. She called Dominic's task force number. She had memorized it from the letter without deciding to. The way you memorize things you look at too many times. And when a voice answered, she said, "This is Naomi Hale. I'm with Dominic Vescari. He's ready to move." She paused. "His son is with him. The offer of inclusion stands." A brief silence on the other end. "What's the location?" the voice said. She gave them the address. She hung up. Both men were looking at her. Dominic with something that had no single name, relief and exhaustion, and something private she didn't try to catalog. Adrian with the raw, stripped expression of a man who was still in the process of becoming whatever he was going to be next. 30 minutes, she said. "Maybe 40. Dominic nodded. She walked to the wall of the condemned building and leaned against it and slid down until she was sitting on the floor, back against concrete, knees up, phone in her lap. Every muscle in her body chose that moment to register the last 18 hours simultaneously, and the result was a comprehensive exhaustion that went beyond tired into something more structural. She heard Dominic sit down on the crate again. She heard Adrian shift on his own crate, settling into the weight. The 3 of them sat in the condemned building in the flat gray afternoon light and said nothing for a while. It was Adrian who broke it. He said, to the floor in front of him, not to either of them directly, "I want to know about him, Marcus. I want to know—" He stopped. "Is Carla— Does she— "She doesn't know I've been watching," Dominic said. "She doesn't know about the protection offer. I didn't contact her because I didn't think I had the right." He paused. "I still don't know if I have the right." "You don't," Adrian said. Not cruel, just honest. But you might earn it. He looked at his hands again. Eventually. Dominic was quiet. He likes fish, Adrian said. Chatte Marcus. Carla sends pictures sometimes. He has a toy fishing rod. A pause. He's never been afraid of them. Of fish. He just picks them right up. Something moved through Dominic's expression. She watched it and looked away, because some things were not for her. She looked at the open freight door and the gray afternoon light in its rectangle on the floor, and thought about Ruth at St. Mercy General, with her oxygen line and her stronger hands and her 20/20 eyes. She thought about 40 hours and Thursday appointments and numbers moving in the right direction. She thought about Dr. Okafor's voice saying responding and what that word had felt like landing. She thought about what came after this. For all of them. For her, specifically, this woman who had been a waitress in a diner and was now sitting on the floor of a condemned building, having called a federal task force and watched a crime organization's succession plan walk out through a freight door. She thought about what kind of woman did things like that, and whether she had always been that woman, or whether something in the last 63 days had built her into one, and she couldn't quite get the answer, couldn't locate the exact moment where Naomi Hale, who did not run, had become Naomi Hale, who walked toward things. Maybe it was the same moment. Maybe it had always been the same quality of person, just pointed in different directions by what the situation required. She heard something outside, not the task force. It was too early for that. Something else. A car, stopping at a distance. Doors. Feet on pavement. She was on her feet before she had decided to stand. Dominic heard it too. He was up off the crate, and something came back into his posture that she had not seen before. Not the diner version of him. Not the man eating oatmeal and talking about fishing with 11-year-old Adrian, but the other version, the 40-year version, the version that had built something enormous and terrible through the precise and patient application of everything he knew about how the world actually worked. Adrian stood. The three of them looked at the freight door. The footsteps were not one person or two. She counted the sound of them. 3, 4, maybe 5 separate rhythms, spaced deliberately in the way that trained people space themselves when approaching a building they don't control. The two men she had watched walk away had been gone for 12 minutes. 12 minutes was enough time to make a phone call. Side door, Dominic said, quiet and flat and absolutely certain. Both of you, now. That's the only other exit, she said. I know. If they have people on the perimeter, then we find out when we get there. He looked at her. His eyes were clear and steady in a way that had nothing to do with calm. Naomi, go. She went. She went through the side door she had come in through, with Dominic 2 steps behind her and Adrian 2 steps behind him, and the afternoon hit her. The temperature, the light, the specific sensory fact of being outside after the closed darkness of the condemned building, and she processed it in half a second, and looked left and right, and left again. The street on the Delaney side was clear. 9th Street was not. There was a black SUV parked 60 yards to the north, with its engine running and a man standing outside it who had the specific quality of stillness of a man who is waiting for something to come to him. He saw them emerge from the side door at the same moment she saw him, and the half-second of mutual recognition was the only half-second they had. Dominic grabbed her arm. This way. He pulled her south along the building's exterior, through the overgrown lot that flanked it, moving fast now without running, because running on uneven ground in the dark is how people fall, and falling here was not an option. Behind them she heard Adrian. She heard his footsteps, and she heard his breathing, harder than hers. Not because he was less fit, but because he was carrying something heavier, had been carrying it for 18 hours through a series of rooms and decisions that were dismantling the entire structure of everything he had been. She heard behind all of that a car door, a shout. Dominic's grip on her arm tightened and he said low and fast, "There's a parking structure 2 blocks south. 3rd level. Blue Civic that I drove myself, so no plates recognizable to anyone in the organization. Keys are above the visor." "You planned this exit," she said, not stopping. "I planned several exits." A pause for breath. "I am not a man who makes decisions without contingencies." The task force. I'm texting the handler the new location. His phone was already in his other hand, thumb moving. "Keep moving." They moved. The parking structure appeared ahead of them. The flat concrete brutalism of a city parking facility, open-sided, wind moving through its levels, the sound of their feet changing as they hit the ramp. First level, second, third. Blue Civic, east corner, alone on the level. She got there first. She reached above the visor and found the keys and had the doors unlocked before Dominic reached the car. Adrian came around the front and got in the back without being told, pulling the doors shut behind him with a controlled quiet that under different circumstances might have been funny. She got in the driver's seat. Dominic stopped at the passenger door. "You drive," she said. "I know the routes. You're texting the handler. I drive. Get in." He got in. She backed out of this space, went down the ramp to the second level, to the first, to the exit, paid the automated machine with $3 in coins from the cup holder with her left hand while watching every mirror with her right, and pulled out onto Delaney Street heading south. She drove exactly at the speed limit. No one followed, or no one followed yet. She drove and watched the mirrors, and Dominic was on his phone, not texting anymore, talking, low and fast, giving the new location, and she heard the voice on the other end recalibrating, coordinating, the machinery of federal logistics adjusting in real time. In the back seat, Adrian was silent. She drove 6 blocks south and 4 blocks east to a parking lot behind a chain grocery store that she selected because it had 3 exits and line of sight in multiple directions, and she pulled in and stopped the engine and they sat. Dominic ended the call. 22 minutes, he said. She nodded. She looked in the rearview mirror at Adrian in the back seat. He was looking out the window at the back of the grocery store, the loading dock, the dumpsters, the mundane infrastructure of ordinary commerce, with the expression of a man who is memorizing something he knows he is looking at for the last time. "Adrian," she said. He looked at the mirror, met her eyes in it. "You dropped the fish," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then something in his face shifted, not the crack from the building, not the grief-wearing strategy's clothes, but something smaller and more specific and more real. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I always did." The 22 minutes passed in a silence that was not empty. It was full of the kind of things that don't have words yet, the things that are still in the process of becoming whatever they're going to be, still molten, still finding their shape. She sat in the driver's seat with her hands in her lap and listened to the city outside and thought about how 63 days ago she had been a woman standing in a diner with coffee soaking through her shirt, doing math. She was still doing math. She would probably always be doing math, but the variables had changed in ways she had not predicted and could not entirely account for, and the answer she kept arriving at was not the answer she had expected. At the 22nd minute, 3 vehicles turned into the far end of the grocery store parking lot and moved toward them with the deliberate, coordinated certainty of something that has been planned for a contingency. Dominic exhaled, long and slow, the sound of a man who has been holding something for 40 years and has just been told he can put it down. He reached over and put his hand on her forearm, not grabbing, not gripping, just the weight of it, there and present. "Naomi," he said. She looked at him. "Thank you," he said, "for the coffee. All of it, every cup." She looked at him for a moment. She thought about what to say. She thought about 63 days of math, and her mother's hands getting stronger, and a man who had been practicing being ordinary in a booth in the back left corner of a diner. And she thought about how you can spend your whole life in the presence of moments that matter and never recognize them until you are sitting in a blue Civic in a grocery store parking lot at the end of something that has changed everything. "It was terrible coffee," she said. He almost smiled. The closest thing to a real smile she had ever seen from him. It was brief and lopsided and 20 years younger than the rest of his face. The federal vehicles stopped around them, doors opened, and the last thing she saw, before everything became the organized, controlled, careful machinery of what came next, was Adrian in the rear-view mirror, sitting in the back seat of his father's anonymous car, looking at nothing in particular, with his hands open in his lap for the first time since she had met him. The federal vehicles formed a loose perimeter around the blue Civic without drama. No lights, no sirens, no announcement of any kind. Just 3 dark SUVs moving into position with the quiet, coordinated certainty of people who do this for a living and have learned that the loudest moments in their work are almost never the most significant ones. The most significant moments are almost always quiet. Parking lots, back doors, the unremarkable spaces between one thing and whatever comes after it. A woman in a gray jacket got out of the lead vehicle and walked toward the Civic with the unhurried pace of someone who has already run through every version of this scenario and knows which one she's in. She stopped at the driver's side window. Naomi had already rolled it down. "Miss Hale," the woman said. She was somewhere in her late 40s, with a face that had been weathered by the specific kind of work that requires you to spend a great deal of time sitting across tables from people who are lying to you. "I'm Agent Dara Moss. Thank you for the call." "The people from the building on Delaney," Naomi said. "There were at least 5, maybe more. They'll know by now that we have people at Delaney." Moss said it with a flatness that was not dismissive. It was the flatness of someone who has already moved 3 steps past the problem you are describing. "Mr. Viscari, we need to move quickly." Dominic was already getting out of the passenger side. Adrian got out of the back. Moss looked at Adrian for a moment, a brief professional assessment, and said nothing. She looked at Dominic. Something passed between them that Naomi could not fully read. The compressed language of people who have been in communication for 4 weeks through secure channels and are now standing in a grocery store parking lot in the flat gray afternoon, and the gap between the phone and the physical fact of each other was being processed in real time. "The son's inclusion has been confirmed," Dominic said. Not a question. "Confirmed," Moss said. Adrian said nothing. He was looking at the back of the grocery store again. The loading dock, the dumpsters, the ordinary world, and she understood that he was doing what she had watched him doing in the rearview mirror. The memorizing of something that was ending. He was cataloging it. The specific texture of a Wednesday afternoon in a city he had spent 43 years in. The smell of it. The sound. Moss turned to Naomi. "We're going to need a statement from you. Not now. In the next few days. What you witnessed, what was said, the specifics of Adrian Viscari's presence at Delaney and 9th. She paused. "You're not a target. You're not a subject of any investigation, but your account matters." "I know," Naomi said. "A detail will stay with you for the next 72 hours, as a precaution, until we've completed the initial extraction and assessed the organization's response." Naomi looked at her. "A detail. 2 agents. They'll be unobtrusive. I have a mother in St. Mercy General. We know. They'll be cleared for the hospital." She thought about Ruth's 20/20 eyes encountering federal agents in the hallway and almost said something, then decided Ruth could handle it. Ruth had handled everything else. Dominic was standing beside the lead SUV now, and one of Moss's people was speaking to him in low, quick sentences, the logistics of the next several hours being compressed into the smallest possible number of words. Dominic was listening with the focused attention of a man who has shifted completely into the operational mode of whatever this new thing is. Not resistance, not hesitation, just forward movement. The same quality of forward movement she had watched him apply to 40 years of criminal organization now turned in the opposite direction with the same precision. Adrian had not moved toward the vehicles yet. She walked to where he was standing. She stood next to him and looked at the loading dock and the dumpsters and the gray sky above the flat roofline of the grocery store. She didn't say anything for a moment. He didn't say anything either. Then he said, "I want to ask you something." "Okay." "In the building, when Reyes moved," he meant the man she had stepped in front of, "you didn't know if he was going to stop." "No. You stepped in front of him anyway." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Why? And don't say what you said to me in there, not the speech version, the real reason." She thought about it honestly. "Because I was already standing there," she said, "and stepping back would have required a decision I didn't have time to make." He turned and looked at her. His face was still raw, still stripped, but it had settled into something more stable. Not the trained blankness, and not the crack beneath it, but a third thing, something she didn't have a precise name for. The face of a man who has been disassembled and is in the early stages of figuring out what to keep. "My father said you changed him," Adrian said. "He didn't say it directly. He would never say it directly. But that's what the last 6 weeks were about. I didn't change him. He changed himself. Because of you. People change because of circumstances," she said. "I was a circumstance." Adrian looked at her for a moment. "You're a very strange woman," he said. I know. I mean that, he paused. I mean that as a respectful observation. I know that too. He almost smiled. Not quite. But the musculature of it was there, just beneath the surface, and she thought that probably in 6 months or a year, in whatever city and under whatever name he was living, the smile would make it all the way out. It would just take time. Most things did. Moss appeared at her peripheral vision. Mr. Viscari, looking at Adrian. We need to go. Adrian looked at Naomi one more time. He nodded once, a small, precise movement that carried more in it than she could fully catalog in the second she had to read it. Then he walked toward the vehicles. Dominic was still standing by the lead SUV. He was watching his son walk toward him, and his face was doing something private that she was not going to examine. She walked toward him anyway, because there were things that needed to be said before the logistics of witness protection and federal extraction swallowed the next several hours and made saying them impossible. He saw her coming and turned. I'm angry at you, she said. He looked at her. For not telling me. The task force, the timeline, what was at risk? You let me walk into 6 weeks of this without the real information. She kept her voice level. That was wrong. You made a choice about what I could handle, and you made it without asking me, and that was wrong. Yes, he said. Don't apologize. I wasn't going to. Good. She looked at him. Because I don't want an apology. I want you to know that I know, and that it mattered, and that the next time you think about making decisions for someone else about what they can handle, there won't be a next time, he said. There won't be much of anything I recognize as a next time. She heard what was in that, the weight of it, the specific gravity of a person standing at the threshold of a complete erasure. Not death, but the close cousin of it, the deliberate dissolution of every external marker that made you the person you had been. What happens to the diner? She said. He frowned slightly. What? Booth 7. What happens to it? Does someone else sit in it? Is it just a booth again? He looked at her for a moment. It was always just a booth, he said. What happened in it was never about the booth. No, she agreed. It wasn't. They looked at each other across a distance of about 4 feet in a grocery store parking lot in the flat gray afternoon, and she thought about 63 days and oatmeal and dried cherries from a Polish market and her mother's hands getting stronger, and a condemned building on Delaney and Ninth, and a man who had spent 40 years building something that was now, piece by piece, being handed to federal prosecutors. And she thought about what any of it meant to say out loud, and decided that most of it didn't need to be. Go be his grandfather, she said. Dominic's jaw tightened for just a moment. Then it released. I'll try, he said. Don't try. She looked at him steadily. Do the thing. Every day. Whatever the name is, whatever the city is, be the person who shows up. She paused. It's not complicated. It's just hard. He nodded. He looked at her one more time with those dark, heavy, badly sleeping eyes, and in them she saw the full ledger of the last 63 days. Every cup of coffee, every conversation, every piece of a man excavated slowly from beneath 40 years of what he had built over himself. And then he got into the SUV and the door closed. The vehicles moved. She stood in the grocery store parking lot and watched them go. When the last taillights disappeared around the corner of the building, she stood in the remaining silence for a moment. Just stood. She was aware of 2 people who were almost certainly federal agents positioning themselves at a discreet distance. A man near a parked car to her left, a woman near the grocery store entrance to her right. And she noted them and let them be. Then she got in the blue Civic and drove to St. Mercy General. Ruth was awake. Ruth was always awake when it mattered. She was sitting up with the monitor above her head doing its quiet mechanical work, and the oxygen line doing its quiet mechanical work, and her hands folded in her lap with the grip they'd had for 2 weeks now. The stronger grip, the grip of a body that was being given what it needed and was using it. Naomi sat in the chair beside the bed and didn't say anything for a minute. Just sat. The chair had conformed to the shape of her over hundreds of hours, and it received her now with a particular familiarity that was, she realized, one of the most comforting physical facts in her life. You look like you've been somewhere, Ruth said. I have. Ruth waited. Naomi told her. The whole thing, the final version, the grocery store, and the parking lot, and Adrian's hands open in the back seat, and Dominic's face at the SUV door. She told it the way she had always told Ruth true things, straight through, no softening, because Ruth had never asked to be protected from the truth, and Naomi was too tired now for the energy that softening required. When she finished, Ruth was quiet for a long time. "The treatment," Ruth said. "Thursday. Covered. Moss confirmed it. The foundation arrangement is being handled separately from the legal proceedings. It's documented as a charitable gift. It stands." Ruth nodded slowly. "And after that?" "Covered. He said long enough." She paused. "I believe him. Because he kept his word before." "Yes." Ruth looked at the window. The evening had come in while they were talking, and the light outside was that particular early evening color that is neither day nor night, that provisional hour that belongs to neither category. "Naomi, what now?" It was the same question Ruth had been asking her for 34 years in 100 different versions. What now after your father left? What now after the nursing school money ran out? What now after the insurance denial, the second one, the third one? Ruth's great and terrible and loving habit, never letting her daughter stay in any place too long, always pressing forward, always what now, like the future was a room that needed to be walked into rather than a thing that happened to you while you were standing still. "I don't know yet," Naomi said. "Naomi, I genuinely don't know yet, Mom." She leaned back in the chair. "I think I need about 48 hours of not knowing before I'll be able to answer that." Ruth looked at her. "You're tired." "I'm very tired." "Sleep here tonight." She looked at her mother. The chair was not a good place to sleep. She had slept in it before and she knew exactly what the morning felt like after, and it was not gentle. But the alternative was her apartment and the city outside her window and the specific voluminous silence of a space that had been full of something for 63 days and was now empty of it. "Okay," she said. She slept. She slept in a way she hadn't slept in weeks. Not deeply, not restfully, but continuously, without the interruptions of 2 a.m. arithmetic and insurance letters and the particular arithmetic of dying mothers and impossible numbers. She slept with the monitor beeping its quiet language above her head, and her mother's breathing filling the room with its effortful, improving sound, and she dreamed nothing she could remember, which was exactly what she needed. Thursday morning, Ruth's treatment proceeded on schedule. Dr. Okafor came in at 8:15 with the specific controlled optimism of a physician who has learned that the line between hope and clinical assessment is a line that must be maintained rigorously or it blurs in directions that help no one. He reviewed the last 2 weeks of numbers. He used the word responding again, and this time added consistently, which was new, and he talked about the next course of treatment and what the markers would need to look like. And Naomi sat in the chair and listened and took notes on her phone in the particular shorthand she had developed over months of medical conversations, the private language of a person who has spent a long time in rooms like this one. When he left, Ruth looked at her with those 20/20 eyes and said, "You're already somewhere else." "I'm right here." "Your body is." Ruth smiled. It was the smile she had been producing for 34 years in response to Naomi's standard claim of presence. "What are you thinking about?" Naomi looked at her notes on her phone. She looked at Ruth's hands on the hospital blanket, and she thought about strength returning incrementally, one measurement at a time, the way real things recover, slowly, without drama, with the daily patience of bodies that have been given what they need and are using it to do what they know how to do. She thought about what Dominic had arranged before he disappeared. Not just the treatment money. In the letter, the one she had read and reread, that she still had in her wallet behind the business card she no longer needed, he had mentioned a foundation. Not the one that had been flagged and frozen. A different one. A legitimate charitable organization, he had written, that handles medical expenses for families in crisis, and that has been looking for someone who understands both the bureaucratic landscape and the human one, and that he had taken the liberty of making an introduction, and that they were expecting her call if she chose to make it. She had not called yet. She called that afternoon from the hospital cafeteria, with a cup of coffee in front of her that she actually drank. The woman who answered was named Patricia Osai, and she had the voice of someone who had been doing difficult work for a long time, and had made her peace with the difficulty without making her peace with the injustice that made the work necessary, which Naomi recognized as the correct position. They talked for 40 minutes. Patricia asked her questions that were specific and practical, and that Naomi found she could answer in detail, because the last 6 months had been an education in exactly the landscape they were discussing: the insurance denial mechanisms, the gap between what families needed and what systems provided, the particular exhaustion of people who were fighting for someone else's life while trying to keep their own above water. "When can you start?" Patricia said. Naomi looked at her coffee cup. She thought about the Anchor Diner in Booth 7 and Lou at the pass-through window. She thought about 6 years of vinyl booth seats and sticky menus, and the specific, unremarkable dignity of work that required you to show up and do it regardless of what else was happening in your life. "I need 2 weeks," she said. "Take 3, Patricia said. "You sound like you need 3. She took 2. She told Lou on a Friday morning, standing at the counter before the breakfast rush. She told him the way she told most true things, straight through, no softening. And when she finished, Lou stood with his spatula in his hand and looked at her for a long time without speaking. "The foundation job," he said. "Yes." "Medical advocacy. Essentially, helping families navigate the system. Appeals, documentation, connecting people to resources." She paused. "What I've been doing for myself for 6 months, but for other people. With support and structure and a salary." Lou turned back to the grill. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're going to be very good at that." "I think so too. You're going to make their lives extremely uncomfortable." He meant the insurance companies, the systems, the structures that had been making her life extremely uncomfortable for 6 months. In the best possible way. "That's the plan." Lou flipped something, let it sit, didn't look at her. "You know this place is going to fall apart without you." "Lou, you ran this place for 4 years before I got here. That was a long time ago." He cleared his throat. "I'd gotten used to not running it alone." She looked at the back of him. This man she had stood next to for 6 years, who had found her in the supply closet and said nothing and stood there and been present, who had said, "You're not being stupid" on a morning when she needed someone to say it, who had given her a key and never asked why. "Thank you," she said, "for all of it, every morning." He cleared his throat again, more vigorously. "Yeah, well," he moved something unnecessarily on the grill. "Coffee's burning." It wasn't. She smiled and went to start her last 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks had a particular quality that she hadn't expected. Not sad, not elegiac, just present. She noticed things she had stopped noticing. The way the morning light came through the front windows at its amber angle. The specific weight of the coffee carafe after a full pour. The sound of the diner coming to life at 6:30, the chairs coming down off the tables, the grill warming up, the particular acoustics of a space that existed for the purpose of feeding people and had been doing it in one form or another for longer than she had been alive. She noticed Booth 7. Other people sat in it now. Had been sitting in it for weeks. A pair of construction workers who ordered the same thing every day. An elderly woman who came alone on Wednesdays and read a paperback with a cracked spine. A rotating cast of the ordinary daily life of a city that had no idea what had happened in that booth. And that amber light over 63 mornings between a man who had been practicing becoming something and a woman who had been watching him do it. She thought about that sometimes between tables. How invisibly significant things could be. How the most consequential conversations of your life could take place in the most unremarkable settings and leave no physical trace whatsoever, just the change in the people who had been part of them. The way a fire leaves ash, but the heat is gone, and only the things that were altered by it remain. On her last day, she worked the full shift. She cleared her section, ran her tables, did the side work, said goodbye to the regulars who had been regulars for 6 years, and who responded with varying degrees of sentiment and practicality. The trucker near the window shook her hand. The 2 nurses from the counter hugged her. A man named Gerald, who came every day for a toasted English muffin and had spoken approximately 40 words to her over 6 years, said gravely, "Well, good luck to you." And she received each of these the way they were given, without deflection and without performance. She said goodbye to Lou last. At the end of the shift, in the kitchen, while he was cleaning the grill. She didn't make a speech. Neither did he. She stood next to him, and he handed her a paper bag that turned out to contain a container of his short rib soup, which he made every winter, and which was one of the best things she had ever eaten. And he said, "For the road." And she said, "It's April." And he said, I know, I made it anyway. And she took the bag, and that was the goodbye. She drove to St. Mercy General. Ruth was out of bed. This was the thing that stopped her in the doorway. Her mother, in the room's one chair rather than in the hospital bed, wearing her own robe and her own slippers, with a magazine in her lap and better color in her face than Naomi had seen in a year. Ruth looked up when she came in. She looked at the paper bag. She looked at Naomi's face. "Last day," Ruth said. "Last day. How was it?" Naomi sat on the edge of the bed, which was empty and made in waiting, and she put the paper bag beside her, and she thought about how to answer that honestly. "Good," she said. "It was good." Ruth looked at her. "And the new thing?" "Monday. Are you ready?" She thought about the 40-minute phone call with Patricia Osei. She thought about the stack of insurance denial letters on her kitchen counter that she had not thrown away and would not throw away, that she was going to use as a kind of personal reference manual for what the families she would work with were living inside. She thought about 6 months of learning the bureaucratic landscape from the ground up, from the losing side, which was the best possible preparation for fighting on behalf of other people who were losing from the same position. "Yes," she said. Ruth reached out and put her hand over Naomi's on the bed. The grip was strong. It had been getting steadily stronger for 6 weeks, and it was strong now in a way that meant something. Not just physically, not just medically, but in the specific language of Ruth Hale's body, saying, "I'm here. I'm staying. The ground is holding." They sat like that for a while. The monitor did its quiet work. The oxygen machine breathed its supplementary breath. Outside the window, the city moved through its early evening, lights coming on in buildings, the sky settling into its nighttime register, the ordinary continuous motion of a place that did not pause for the particular human moments happening inside it. "Mom," Naomi said. Do you think he'll find her?" "His daughter." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "I think that depends on her," she said, "and on whether he gives her a reason to be found." "He will." "You believe that?" "Yes." She looked at their hands. "I watched him eat oatmeal every morning for 6 weeks and talk about dried cherries from a Polish market with a voice like he was excavating something. A man who talks like that about his mother's kitchen." She paused. "He has it in him, the capacity. It was just buried under a lot of weight." "Most people's capacity is," Ruth said. "Yes." "That's what you're going to do now," Ruth said. "In the new job. Find the capacity in people and show them where it is." Naomi looked at her mother. "When did you get wise?" "I've always been wise," Ruth said. "You've just been too busy to notice." Naomi laughed. It was a small sound, involuntary, the kind of laughter that escapes rather than being produced, and it surprised her with its own existence that this was something she could still do. Just laugh, without preamble, without analysis, because something was genuinely funny. Ruth smiled and squeezed her hand. She left the hospital at 7 and drove home with the windows down because it was April and the air had that particular April quality. Cool and specific and smelling of the city beginning to warm up after winter, of concrete releasing the memory of cold, of things starting again in the way things start again every year, whether you are ready for them or not. She went up the stairs to her apartment. She unlocked the door. She turned on the light. The stack of insurance letters was on the kitchen counter where it had always been. She looked at it, walked to it, picked it up and held it for a moment. This physical record of 6 months of being told no, the accumulated documentation of a system that had looked at her mother's life and calculated that it was not worth the expense, that had forced her into a series of choices that had led, by the most improbable and unrepeatable chain of circumstances, to a man eating oatmeal in a back booth, and the slow, improbable excavation of something that had been buried under 40 years of everything else. She put the letters in her work bag. She was going to need them. She made tea she didn't drink and sat at the kitchen table where she and Ruth had eaten dinner for 12 years after her father left. And she sat in the specific silence of an apartment that had been full of worry for so long that the silence was new and a little strange, like a room with furniture rearranged, the same space, differently weighted. She thought about a woman named Patricia Osei, who had said take 3 with the voice of someone who understood about needing time. She thought about families she hadn't met yet who were doing the math she had done. The cold, grinding arithmetic of impossible choices and closed windows, and the specific exhaustion of fighting for someone else's life while trying to keep your own above water. She thought about what she knew that they didn't know yet, which was that the window was not always as closed as it appeared, that the arithmetic sometimes had variables you hadn't accounted for, that sometimes the most unlikely thing happened. Sometimes someone in a diner booth turned out to be capable of more than you had predicted, and the world shifted on an axis you hadn't seen coming. She thought about what she knew that she hadn't known 63 days ago, which was harder to articulate but present in her the way things are present that have been learned through the body rather than the mind. Through 63 mornings of standing at the edge of a table and listening, through a supply closet at 9:15, through a condemned building and a parking lot and a grocery store at the end of a Wednesday afternoon. She had learned something about the distance between what a person appears to be and what they are. She had learned that the distance was sometimes very large, and that crossing it required someone to be standing on the other side and not moving, and that the not moving was harder than any other thing. She had been very good at not moving. She thought that was probably going to be the most useful thing she had. In the new work, with the new families, in the rooms where people were exhausted and frightened and doing math that didn't come out right, she was going to be the person who stood still and didn't move, who held the space without making it smaller, who said "I know" and meant it in the full and documented sense of having been in that room herself. She knew what that was worth. She had learned it from a man who came to a diner and ate ordinary food and talked about things he had never talked about before, and who had been changed not by love or money or the threat of consequence, but by the very simple, very difficult, very old-fashioned experience of being treated like a person whose capacity for change was real and worth taking seriously. She had taken it seriously. She would take it seriously again. With every family, every file, every phone call with an insurance representative who expected her to apologize and was going to be disappointed. Outside her kitchen window, the city moved through its night. It did this the way it always did, with complete indifference to any individual human life occurring inside it. But individual human lives were occurring inside it, thousands of them, hundreds of thousands. People doing math, finding windows, fighting for the people they loved, standing still when everything in them wanted to run. She sat at the table until the tea was cold and the city had settled into its deeper nighttime register, and then she stood up and rinsed the cup and turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. She slept cleanly. No arithmetic, no letters, no monitors, and no machines. Just the city outside and her own breathing, and the specific, unremarkable weight of a person who has done what she set out to do and is, for the first time in a very long time, simply ready for what comes next. Somewhere under a different name, in a city she would never know, a man was eating breakfast and thinking about a boy who liked fish and didn't mind picking them up. And for the first time in 40 years, the future looked more like a room he was walking into than a thing that had already been decided. She did not know this. She would never know the details of it, but she had always been good at knowing things without the details. She turned off the light, she slept, and the city went on doing what cities do, holding all of it, all at once, the grief and the recovery, and the ordinary Wednesday evenings, and the extraordinary condensed moments that looked, from the outside, like nothing at all. A diner, a booth, a cup of coffee, a woman who didn't apologize, and that were, from the inside, everything. Everything. End.